So, we are asking really quite an interesting question for a London audience. Why do 50% of London families use a tutor? That figure comes from me, actually, and it was based on some research I did a few months ago, looking into the best estimates of tutor use in the UK, and London by miles has the highest percentage, and by the time you get to 16, like GCSE, 50% of kids in the London area have had a tutor at some point. They won't necessarily have a tutor all the way through, but 50% of London kids in all types of school will at some point or other have a tutor. And there are all sorts of different reasons for that. And they're not all paid for by the parent as well. There's quite a lot of children who get tutors paid for by the state in state schools. But it's a very common phenomenon in London. And to answer this question, to talk about what tutors do, I've got Will Petty from Bonas MacFarlane. Will, do you want to just quickly explain what Bonas MacFarlane tuition is?
Yeah, thanks, Guy. Welcome, everybody. Bonas MacFarlane is a sort of group of educational businesses. On the one side, where I now spend most of my time, we're an educational consultancy. And we do...
Hold your mic a little bit closer to your mouth.
Sorry. We do comprehensive school placement. And then the oldest part of our business is a private tuition business, and we do one-on-one, exclusively one-on-one private tuition, mostly in person, but also online. And we've been doing that now in the market for nearly 30 years, I think. I hasten to say I wasn't there for that first decade. And we do everything. So whatever the subject, whatever the age, within reason, we offer that. And we try and do it in a way that mirrors what independent schools are offering. So it extends to art, to music, to sport, not just the traditional academic subjects.
And you'll notice that Will is not Jason. Unfortunately, Jason, who was the other speaker that was meant to be here today, can't make it. So, but that's fine because Will has extensive experience. You tutored yourself, didn't you?
Yeah, that's how I started in education. I was pretending to do something else that I was really bad at, photographer in my case, and I was encouraged by my mum, who's in education, is in specialist education, to earn some money, quite frankly. In her words, and I fell in love with it. I got very lucky, and it was the beginning of a monumental boom in tuition, which, to be honest, hasn't really abated in the 20-odd years that have followed. I specialised in school entrance, so particularly in those days, one of the big ones was 13+ common entrance, which doesn't really exist anymore. So I've sort of seen several sea changes with admissions through the eras. But I also did just traditional subject tuition, and I specialised in most things, but particularly maths and science up to 16.
Great. So just to get a sense of the room and where you're all at with tuition, can you put your hand up if you currently have a tutor, do you employ a tutor? Okay, so about a third of the room. Who currently has their child in an independent school? About half the room. And who currently has a child in a state school? Right. So I'm not clever enough to do the crossover of whether you are more likely to have your hand up for tuition and be in a state school or an independent school. But a really interesting thing with tests is that you might be in either, mightn't you? I mean, the parents who are preparing children for 11 plus or for other entry tests could have their child in either system.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the state side of things, of course, the state system does have selective schools that use tests, and notably their grammar schools. On the private side, almost all independent schools have some form of admissions test. It might not be overtly academic based, but there are very few, particularly senior schools, that don't have any form of testing. And of course, we do the traditional tuition of subjects and just making sure you're getting it. So with the state sector parents, there tends to be a greater number in that group, at the moment certainly, who are supplementing their state education and just making sure that their kids are getting that little extra 20% attention at home on an individual basis that might be getting slightly lost in a larger class group that you tend to find in the state sector.
Okay, so that leads very nicely to the first sort of proper question. What are the main reasons that parents get a tutor?
Right, so specific admissions tests or specific tests and exams. So, in the schooling entrance world, you've got the 7, the 8, the 11, and the 13 plus, as well as the 16 plus, which is supplementary. So those are the 5 major entry points, and it slightly differs where you are in the country as to how prevalent each one of those is going to be. So that's an obvious one. And there are obvious reasons to do that. So, if you're at a school that does carry on through the year groups, but you're leaving before that moment, before that school ends, you're not going to be able to rely on that school to prepare you to leave. That's not what they're there for. They're expecting you to stay. So that's an obvious option where you would go and get sort of external help so you can be positive that your child is prepared in the right way for whatever it is coming up on the horizon. The sort of even more distinct and maybe better served historically area of tuition is towards public exams. GCSEs, A-levels, the IBs are now on the scene as well. And, it's there's a lot of that about, and that's definitely what I felt when I started out. Easter holidays was, boom time for tuition, still is. And, I found I could make quite a lot of money during the Easter and then work for free on terrible movie sets in the weeks that followed. So there's a real mix. And then, of course, there are completely off the wall things, like your child is interested in something that your school doesn't offer. So it's nothing to do with what he or she is learning at school. It's something new, like they might be showing an interest in Persian poetry that you want to satiate for them. And also, I know Guy will probably get onto this later, but it's important just to think about tuition not as just a means to an end for some of the reasons we've just said, but it can be just a luxury thing, something to do which is different to what is going on in your schooling life.
And I guess so. We focused on kind of exam-driven reasons for doing it. What about sort of academic catch-up or SEND? Do you get that?
Yeah. So on the SEND front, obviously, lots of the children that we see, students, young people that we see, some of their obstacles that they might be having in their learning quite often are time-based and also attention-based. And if they're in a mainstream school where the individual attention isn't quite there, and it's very often classroom, a lot of those children can feel slightly left behind during the 40-minute session or lesson, however long those school lessons are, and maybe not getting, not being able to fully process the whole lesson, or being distracted if they've got some attention issues, and so on and so forth. It's really important for those kids to have that little buffer where they know that they can go home after school and get those holes filled in and make sure that actually that school day they did get the full amount out of it. And some of those reasons can become quite specialist. And then there's the thing where, we ask our kids to do a lot, and Guy has spoken about this with me before, and, in tuition, it's also quite important to think about extra things that you might be quite good at. A lot of people focus on tuition going into, they're not very good at maths, we've got to get maths tuition, or the classical stuff. But actually, a lot of our kids are really going to respond brilliantly well to something they might be quite good at already, and getting extra attention so that they can really develop that passion. And if you're going to make them sit down and do maths tuition, which they're not crazy about because they're not very good at it, and they've got this understandable psychological block about really enjoying the subject, also think about getting them some tuition as something they really, really love, where they can start showing off a little bit and have some flex and getting the edge over their classmate who always just about beats them in the test or that kind of thing. So it doesn't always have to be about test-driven stuff, and in fact, that can get really dull, and you can do much more interesting things when you're not thinking about tests.
I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, like with music or sport, you take it for granted that you get more coaching and more individual coaching the better you are at something. So you tend to start in groups, and then gradually, as you get really good at it, you get better and better teachers. It is true in academic teaching as well, in that when you get to the really top level, like when you become a PhD student, you're getting a lot of one-to-one support from a very high level academic. Clever kids will benefit from that when they're young as well, having someone that they can talk to about what to read next, or what they thought of, the Oresteia or something when they're 11 or 12. They might find that the teacher at school isn't interested in having that conversation with them. I remember vividly, actually, on a personal level, being told I was pretentious by my English teacher when I was 14. I found that a really kind of unbelievable statement, because I thought, well, if obviously you're pretending, I've only just read it. I'm not an intellectual. I'm a 14-year-old, but I've just read this book and I want to talk about it. I was told I was pretentious for wanting to raise it. I won't tell you what it was and what the question was, but it doesn't really matter. But I would have loved at that age to have had a tutor that I could talk to about the things I was reading, because my parents didn't read particularly, and So I do think that there is a tendency for parents to try and use tuition as a band-aid, when actually it can be more of a kind of like catapult if you get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sort of on the flip side of that, there's a tendency for parents to sort of band-aid it, but kind of go down this kind of homework tuition route, where they've got someone coming in to sort of relieve the burden of the homework, and some of these, all of our schools are capable of giving out loads. They vary from school to school. I'm not a massive fan. I don't think there should be a huge amount going home, certainly in the primary years or prep school years if you're talking independent spiel. So going down the tuition road to use it as a crutch, where it's just something you have to have in the background all the time, is a mistake. You've got to remember that these children, young people, they're going to have to do these exams at some point, or whatever it might be, alone. Right? Tuition doesn't help them memorize the GCSE syllabus. Okay, it should be about, unpicking the concepts they don't understand very well, and equally having someone who's there daily, making sure the homework gets done. You've got to start thinking about how valuable and sensible that is. There are tutors out there who are doing that supportively and are not doing the homework for the child, but inevitably complacency can set in. And, if you're frustrated and you've had a long day as a grown-up and you're the tutor, and then this kid just is not getting it, there's a good chance that you might have a weak moment and just start kind of, giving them the answers. But you're then undoing the whole purpose of the homework, what the school was trying to do during the day. And despite some people's opinions, good tutors, diligent tuition companies are not trying to do that. They're trying to get tuition that is effective, necessary, and performative, that is promoting this kid's interests as well as improving their weaknesses and eradicating them as much as they can.
So we're going to drill in a moment to what it is that good tuition does and how it does it and how effective it is. Before we do that, it was really interesting. Who was here at the end of the last talk here? Yeah, quite a few people. So Jesse, who was the head of Seven Oaks, he did a really sort of strong denunciation. The last thing he said, I just wanted to grab the mic and say, "Don't get a tutor." That was like literally the last thing he said. And we always paired this talk with the talk on highly selective schools, because there's an obvious kind of connection that almost everyone who's applying for a highly selective school is going to get a tutor. And every time we do this, I make the heads leave the room before we have this discussion, because they always say the same thing, which is don't get a tutor. It's like a mantra that they have. And one of the things I find really peculiar is, they don't say don't read a book or don't. What is it that they have against tuition?
I think understandably there's a worry that, and rightly, that particularly in the younger years, children's sort of, childhood is being sort of robbed from them. Not only have they got to go to school, but then they've got the sodding Latin tutor turning up at 5 p.m. when they get home and they're knackered. And actually what they want is a packet of crisps, a can of juice, and I don't think anyone's ever used this phrase, a can of juice, but, these days it's a bit more relevant. And to chill out and sit in front of the telly, and God damn it, they should be doing that. Of course that should be happening. And people in educational leadership, understandably, are protective of that. However, if you're running very highly selective institutions where the stakes are quite high for the people who are about to join them, it's very difficult to convince everybody not to prepare. And if, as this title of this talk suggests, there's a huge number of other of your competing students going down that road, it's even harder to not be sort of, coerced or, encouraged into thinking that that's a necessity. But it always should be targeted and for a reason.
I think you're being too nice, Will. I think it is a control thing. I think they really think I think there's two bits to it. So one is they don't like the idea that perhaps what they're delivering isn't quite sufficient, and that parents think they need to top it up with something else. That really annoys them, because they like to think that they're responsible for your child's academic success, not somebody else. And so they straightforwardly find it really, really annoying that it might be somebody else that's doing it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that they like to think that they can assess clever kids, and they can use these standardized tests, which are quite stupid, really, to be honest, and that you can't train for these tests, but you can train for them. So it annoys them because it's revealing the flaw of their testing mechanism for their entry. So they've got several quite profound reasons why they really hate tuition, because it slightly screws up the way that they do things.
Yeah, I think you're right, and yes, I was being a bit nice because I rely on these head teachers to take the children that I'm sending them, so I have to be quite balanced in my criticism. But when I started as a tutor in the early days of the private tuition market really taking a hold in a quite dramatic, sort of cosmic way in the sort of noughties, we were so unwelcome at schools. We would try and speak to schools about our students who were having problems and say, look, we're working with them. We don't want to be the enemy at the gate. We don't want to upset you. We want to enhance and encourage what you're doing and make this better for you, for the student, for the parents. And it was a decade until anyone stopped to listen to us. And it might have been helped by the fact, we merged with the company that runs the schools exhibition. We're always open to that. And I sort of understand it, but I also understand Guy's slightly stronger stance. And it is quite sort of, they do feel they're being overly criticised and they've been put on the mark and it's invasive and blah, blah, blah. The one thing I used to hear a lot as a maths tutor was, the complaint would come back and a parent take me to one side and say, look, the school's complained because, little Timmy's gone in and his maths teacher's pointed out he's doing a certain concept a different way to that she taught it. And does he have a tutor in that? Can you stop doing that because it's getting in the way of my teaching? Which my response was, no, you taught him one way to do things. He couldn't do that, and I taught him a way that he could do that. And why is that a problem? Right? He's just got the answer right, but before he was getting it wrong. I don't see how that's disrupting the class. So, I am very passionate about tuition. I'm very passionate about schools, and there's a balance to be struck.
I think some of the things, I think COVID has changed a lot of things. So one of the things post-COVID, there was a huge amount of state funding, government funding for one-to-one tuition and small group tuition that went out through schools, through state schools, to help kids catch up who got caught behind. And so a lot of kids all across the country are having one-to-one tuition provided by tutors, but organised by schools. And that has radically changed how a lot of schools now think about tuition, because it's now not just because there's another thing also in the state system where it's the middle class kids who have tutors and the private schools, and the less well off kids don't, and that can seem annoying to teachers. I think that's a more valid reason to be annoyed personally, but that is one of the reasons why. Another reason why schools don't like tuition, but because there's been this funding for tuition for the most disadvantaged students, that has changed a bit how schools see it, and they see the value of it, and they think it works. So, I think that the situation is more complex now, and there is more understanding that tuition can do something. So let's dig in a bit to what happens. How does tuition work? So,
in your average classroom, you, depending on private or state, there's going to be, let's say in the primary school years, 20 to 30 children. There's a lot to get through. Our system is very heavy on content, particularly in certain subjects. GCSEs are a great example of what's essentially a rote learning exercise, and there are lots of stuff that needs to be kind of pushed through. Guy, I slightly forgotten your question.
How does it work? What happens? I mean, no.
So, certainly how we do things, we specialise in one-on-one. So a tutor's coming in to work with your child in person or online, and hopefully that tutor has identified the reasons for the tuition, the weaknesses of this child early on, and the focus is on their specific crises within that subject. Or if it's a tuition for something they enjoy more, it's pushing them into those areas that they haven't come across yet and developing their knowledge and their skills. Also, at the same time, certainly within my business, we focus on all of our tuition, no matter what subject it's in, is improving and promoting the best possible learning skills from that student, often quite obliquely and not necessarily directly, but by demonstration, by the way that the tutor is operating. The thing is that every classroom, no matter what the school, is there's more than one child in it, is a group deal. That teacher in front of that class has to cut the line of best fit that suits the majority of the children in the room. Both at the top end and the bottom end of that sort of performance metric, you might say, you are going to have children who are not being stretched enough and switching off, and those children who are getting left behind. Classrooms are quite a capitalist environment. The strong get stronger and the weak get weaker, by and large. Tuition is that missing 10% to 20%, depending on the situation, that no classroom will ever be able to give. One-on-one work is just dealing with that student and that student alone. You can be completely tailored. If you compare an hour of tuition to a 40-minute lesson in a school, if you walk around a school and you look into a classroom, guarantee that any moment you look in, half the kids will be looking out the window, picking their nose, texting their girlfriend, whatever it might be. Right? They're not paying attention for that 40 minutes. In an hour of tuition where you're only dealing with that child's weaknesses, issues, concerns, things they want to do, it's a captive audience. There's no looking out the window or picking your nose. The guy or girl teaching you is sat in front of you, staring right at you. You have nowhere to hide. So the potency per minute of that education, when it's done well, and I appreciate, like everything in the world, there are bad tutors out there, bad tuition companies, but when it's done right and well and ethically with best practice in mind, it is something a classroom can simply scientifically never offer. So,
okay, so I think that's really true. I think there's also, though, a huge range of things that are called tuition, aren't there? So literally, it could be someone tells you about, who tutors a bit of maths occasionally, to a big swanky agency like Bonas MacFarlane, and the prices are fairly different, not as different as you might think, actually. I always think the top end of tuition is remarkably cheap compared to the bottom end. It's much less so than school fees or fancy holidays or other things you might buy. There isn't the same differential in price between the top and the bottom in tuition as there is in other things. But we can talk numbers if you like it on that one. But neither of us are the right person for that particular conversation. But there is something different that a big agency like Bonas MacFarlane does. They add value beyond just the tutor, don't they?
Yeah, I think that's true. And look, there are quite brilliant independent tutors out there who operate alone and aren't part of an agency group. The problem with them is, it's quite difficult for you to be the quality assurance inspector on that front. You're probably taking your friend's word for it, who recommended them. I mean, hopefully you didn't tear their phone number off a piece of paper that was stuck to a lamppost on Clapham High Street, which I see every day, and not just in Clapham. Sorry, Clapham. But when I used to live there, it was quite evident. How you're policing that, and if you're going to go down that road, yes, you're going to save some money, but you've got no kind of larger body overseeing the management of that. So you need to be really on top of it. You need to sort of know a bit more about what your child needs than you might do if you just, going to someone sort of with more expertise in the building. With an agency like ours, you've got someone to talk to all the time. And if something's going wrong, you pick up the phone and go, it's not working. It's no offense to the tutor. They're clearly really good, but they just don't get on. And, my child is just not responding. So can we just change it up, please? Or hopefully not a Bonas MacFarlane, but it has happened. I'm really sorry, but they're not prepared. They're not doing their stuff. And, we're not using you anymore because you let us down immediately. The problem is with an independent is there's none of that, all right? So the policing and the arbitrage is all on you, and you have to have a think about how well positioned you are to do that job as well. And so going to a reputable agency, there are others available, I can see a couple of them in the room, is, at least gets you closer to being sure that this stuff has been thought through, the person in front of you has been checked in various ways for ability, for their own qualifications, for being a safe person to bring into the household, stuff that is really vital. And you've got someone to hold to account all the day without the embarrassment of having to hold the tutor to account. Because chances are, if it goes wrong with an individual tutor, you're not going to talk to them about it. You're just going to sack them and move on. So Yes, you pay more money with an agency, but that extra money is definitely going somewhere, and it is worth doing at the right level.
Yeah, and there'll be certain expectations about things that they'll do, like reporting of.
Yeah, absolutely. We our tutors report on every session. A, so we know what they're doing, but B, so that the parents can keep track of it. And also, we're here to educate the household, really, because we want everybody to feel better about it. If you're going towards entrance tests, it's not just about making sure that your child feels okay with what's going on. It's about making sure that you're okay, so you can support them from a pastoral point of view. Because no matter what anyone tries to do, as long as you've got tests, there's going to be stress involved. And it's important that the whole home has that stress reduced, not just the poor child that's sitting through it all.
Can you over-tutor, which is a big fear that people have?
I think over-tutor is not the right word. I think you can misguide the tuition. So if it becomes such a thing, like I was saying earlier, where the tutor's basically doing the work, that's what I would say is over-tuition. I think once you get to a certain age, certainly to sort of pre-teen, teen years, and towards university, it's quite hard to over-tutor. And I think if it was going down that road, I think the student would probably put their hand up and be like, this is pointless, Mum, save some money and can I have it as pocket money instead, please?
Great. So we've kind of come to an end. We've got a few minutes if anyone would like to ask a question. So does anyone have a burning question about tuition? Yep, there's one here. We got a microphone.
So we have a son in year 4.
Yep.
And we're thinking about 11 plus entry. Some people have suggested that starting in year 4 versus year 5 is too early and the kid might get a bit burnt out. What's your opinion on that?
It's a great question, by the way. So every child is different, of course, right? And, the one thing to do when you're starting to look at 11 plus is, if you can afford it, is to go out and get some external advice, preferably quite a high-end assessment that will at least give you a baseline where you can understand where their weaknesses are in a way that your average school report's probably not telling you, because your average teacher at year 4 is not thinking about the 11 plus yet. I don't think it is an early time to start. What I would say is drip feed it in slowly. So, it's just once a week. Get them used to the tuition and keep it light. It is too early to start doing test practice in year 4, for sure, but the tuition itself, definitely not. Get them used to it. Get them used to, if it has to be after school or it's on a Saturday morning, get them used to that being part of their weekly routine and their timetable. There's a lot to be said just for that part of it, and the stamina side of things. Year 4 they're still pretty little, right? So one should be wary of it. We turn away quite a few people, in the younger years because we don't believe that that's the right thing to do. They should be outside getting dirty fingernails and grazed knees. So, but don't be afraid of it. And when you get to year 5, again, I wouldn't start the test prep that soon either, but maybe start to look at upping it to twice a week. And then towards the end of year 5, maybe then that's when you start separating the tuition and you have one person for mathematics and the more non-verbal side of the testings that we see around, and another person for the literacy side of things. And again, that shakes things up a bit. It gives them another adult who's coming into their lives to adjust to keep on their toes a bit, but again, building that stamina gently. What you don't want to do is hang tight, try and pretend that you're rescuing their childhood, and then suddenly go, hey Tim, it's 3 times a week and the nights are getting darker and we've got a big test coming up. Panic now, pal. Dream them into it, get them there through it gently, as far as your budget can allow. It doesn't have to be standout tuition as well. It could be something else, it could be a club they go to, but something where their day's a little bit longer, or they've got that extra thing in the week, so they're getting used to what is a building. My children just joined senior school from prep school age, from primary to secondary, and the jump is massive in of itself in terms of, they live with their mother, and when I get them on the phone at the end of the evening, the last couple of weeks they've just been like that, and there's no point talking to them. I sort of gave up after a while, but they're starting to get used to it now a month in. So it's really good if you can find mechanisms to ease them into it, whether it's for extra tuition purposes, but just generally speaking, keeping their cognitive stamina up. over the day, over the week. That's a great reason to start early, and never ever wait to the end and throw the kitchen sink at it. It doesn't work.
I mean, given science to kind of wind it up, but actually we don't need to. So unless you want to, we've got a half-hour gap to the next talk, so we're going to carry on for a little bit if you're comfortable with that. But if you want to move on to something else, do feel free to go. But the just on that point about how long to do it for, if you were in the previous talk about highly academic schools. One of the things, obviously, is keeping a lid on everyone's anxiety. So, like, a long period is really good if what you're doing is background work that builds up stamina. But what you don't want is 2 years of anxiety. Okay, so it's like you if you make the tuition about the tests that are coming up in 2 years' time, that's 2 years of anxiety. It has to be, the purpose has to be something else.
Yeah, completely. Exactly. As I was saying to begin with, it's got to be... you shouldn't be going anywhere near practice questions until halfway through year 5, in my opinion, regardless of the child in front of you. You need to build up the foundational work, the concepts, the confidence, the stamina, and then later on. Otherwise, we were talking about over-tutoring. I think that's where that stuff becomes dangerous. You know, we see children who come to us on the other side of the business who've done their tutoring without our supervision. And, you know, I've got, you know, it's like, oh, he's been doing the so-and-so test online since, you know, the beginning of, like, year 4. Why? He's not going anywhere near it. He's going to be so bored of being put through, or she, being put through those, you know, and by the time they get to the test that, you know, they're not going to care about it enough. You know, you do need to really think about the trajectory that you take. Yeah,
I mean, the biggest problem that's happening in education these days is across schools, at least as much as tuition, is teaching to the test. I mean, it's astonishing now. I mean, GCSEs, I don't know if any of you've got children in GCSE years, but a lot of schools now start ramming them through GCSE papers almost the moment they enter year 10. I have fourth year is what I was thinking, was what it was called when I was at school. But yeah, it's like and they do ridiculous amounts of tests and not enough time enjoying the subject and learning.
Yeah, absolutely right. The testing is, you know, even if you're getting ready to do these psychometric tests, which are cognitive function tests, they're not necessarily measuring content. You know, let your child learn those skills through things that they enjoy, that are worth learning about, not just drilling and drilling and drilling, because that is counterproductive ultimately.
And actually, if they're clever enough to, you know, you don't need to do very many of them to get the format of the thing.
No, I mean, yeah, precious few actually.
It's the same with A levels or anything. You know, you've got the kind of academic kids. They just need to be told what the format is, really.
Yeah, and also even when you're doing those public exam at that level, and it's GCSEs and A level, I would argue that you know, the good students are being taught in their good teachers are teaching them all the way along about how to answer the questions in the exam, and you don't have to rush towards that bit. The technique bit of the exams isn't the tough bit; it's memorising all the stuff. That's the tricky part.
Any more questions? Great.
Hello. When parents go to agency to find tutors, how can we check the background of the tutors? For example, if I have a friend who had a tutor and their child went to Westminster, St. Paul's and other schools, I have proven record of that those tutors prepared those particular boys and girls for those schools. But if as a parent I go to agency, then in a world when anyone can pretend, can fake reviews, how can I be sure that you tutors prepare children for exact schools? Thank you.
Very good question. Do you want to explain how it works? I mean, straightforwardly, I know about Bonas MacFarlane because it's a sister company of School-tutor. You get tutors' CVs, and those CVs have been checked by Bonas MacFarlane. So it's like a double check. It's not, and you're not just relying on the agency. It's not like buying a burger from McDonald's. You're getting the kind of the academic background, and where that. I mean, they don't shout about this enough. Oddly, they're quite shy about promoting themselves. But what they're really good at is finding tutors who've gone through the same journey. That's the real way that's why they've built a big tutoring agency. So if your child is applying for, to take a scholarship at a particular school or going for a particular university, they generally find a range of tutors for you to choose from who've done exactly the same thing. And that's what's really brilliant about it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Most agencies now are part of the Tutors Association, which is a sort of industry watchdog and professional organisation. But also, your friend who's telling you that, she's only doing that, or he, because that's what they got told by this tutor. I doubt they've checked it like we've checked it. And, lots of our tutors are very experienced and, we charge a lot less for those that are new to us until they have racked up a little bit of a CV under our roof. So not only, have we checked everything, but now we know because they've done it with us. So I'd actually be much more wary of getting recommendations from friends, because I've seen parents, hopefully if they're proper friends this won't happen, but parents that through school and things like that, they're quite protective over really good tutors, and they don't necessarily share the information because they don't want to share, period. And you see a lot of tutors on the independent side of things going out and saying, I've done this and I've done that. It just amazes me how the parents don't have any way of checking that. They're just taking their word for it. So, all of these things require caution, agency or independent, of course. But I think if you go to a reputable agency which has been around for a long time and people speak about well and has good online peer-to-peer reviews and all that kind of stuff, you're far more likely to be safer in the information you've been given.
Yeah, a lot of London parents are surprisingly sharp-elbowed. It's not just it's somehow around school choices and things. People who could be really quite pleasant about most matters in their lives can become really quite unpleasant, can't they?
Yeah, I cannot tell you how many times that I've had families who I'm working with as a consultant, who have been told total lies by people they think they get on with, whose children are in the same class. And that's a thing, sadly. It's a human thing. It's not specific to London parents, but it's competitive, and that has an effect on the demographic.
It's just the nature of it's a numbers game with those. It's particularly with certain kinds of schools, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any more questions before we? Okay, one more over here.
Hi, thank you. This might be a little bit left field, but I wondered to what extent tutoring can support on the pastoral side. So if you have a daughter who is academically exceeding, but confidence is a bit of a problem, how can tutoring, and is tutoring appropriate to help that child get through the process?
Great question. And perhaps we've actually spoken too much about the kind of academic side of it. I always used to say, and I still very much believe, that when you're getting a good tutor into the household, you're adding another adult into your child's life. Hopefully someone who's a place of support they can go to with questions. But with the tutor, it's quite different. It's not an older sibling. It's not mum. It's not dad. It's not a teacher. You're introducing a new type of individual, often a bit younger than the other categories, not the sibling, but, the mum and dad and their teacher, who they can imagine, being alongside in the nearer future, who they can confide in a bit more, in more of a buddy way. And certainly at Bonas MacFarlane, one thing that we felt very strongly about when we set the company up was all of our tuition is a form of mentoring. And our tutors are encouraged, and we demand from them that they are focusing on that pastoral element, that they are, making sure that where possible, they're giving that student in front of them this latent confidence to take through. And also these days, let's face it, just actively saying to them, you need to try and think about worrying less. And also saying to them, don't worry, like all this stuff does work out. It doesn't feel like it will. It feels terrifying, but you're not alone. There's loads of places to go for support. We're all here for you. And, you'll make it. And often you'll make it, because that's where you kind of belong. And you don't see very often children in completely the wrong schools or with completely the wrong grades, or walking around because they couldn't find either the good grades or a school on the streets of London. And so there's quite a lot of avenues to sort of help them see that, which maybe if they're really pushing themselves in a very academic school, that they're not reminded of often enough.
On that front, I'll give you an anecdote which I think relates. I went to a really musical school. I'm completely tone deaf. When I was 11, at school I started having piano lessons, having had piano lessons at home before from a friend of my mother's. And my teacher was a concert pianist, I mean, at a really high level. And I was terrible. And so I used to go into these lessons and I'd play the piece and it would be worse that week than it had been the week before. And this would be the first 2 or 3 minutes of the lesson. And then she would weep, literally weep. And then she would shut the lid of the piano and we would talk for 25 minutes about everything other than music. And we both really liked that, and it completely kept me sane. And I carried on doing it till I was 16. I never got grade 1. I was a terrible, terrible piano player. She didn't even try to teach me. She wrote encouraging sounding reports that meant my parents kept paying for it, and it was completely what kept me sane through the 14, 15. It was basically therapy. She was the therapist. It was just my piano teacher, but it was brilliant. And so I think tuition can be it's really useful to have someone to talk to, and that can be your tutor. I think we should stop. That was too much sharing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.